And we're about to move into a presentation by Rinaldo Brutuco. Rinaldo was the founder of the World Business Academy back in 1987, so it's been going for a while. And the purpose of that organization was to help business take responsibility for the whole, was how the language was put for a number of years. Part of the work he's been doing recently has to do with the daily optimist. Now, without too much background along these lines, what he has been able to do is take that particular body of work, and if you sign up for it, every day you get 5 little short snippets about what's working right in the world today. Now, as you can imagine, this is my line. I like to look at those kinds of things. And he and his partner with the World Business Academy, Christy Jansen, have been putting on a radio program recently. It's broadcast from Santa Barbara, but it goes wide on good news that's going on locally. So his interest has been in manifestation of what we might call different aspects of the divine plan. Well, Rinaldo, thank you for joining us here this morning on Saturday, and we are delighted to have you with us. So, carry on. We'll see if we can hear you now.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. Although I am familiar in a remote sense with the work of Alice Bailey, as anyone I think who's ever done any work in esoterica is, I certainly am not adept enough to want to couch this conversation with you in that terminology. You've got people in your group of presenters that are far more capable than I can speak to that nexus between your esoteric interests and what some of us can speak to practically. I do share with a deep fundamental belief I think you all have, and that is that the path of service is ultimately the path of grief and liberation. So for me, a question I asked myself many, many years ago, and I continue to ask myself every day, is how can I serve? And the reason I ask that question is because I think when you have the complexity of the multidimensional world we live in, not just the physical plane of the galaxies, not just the space-time continuum, and not just the advanced information we now possess about quantum physics, but when you look at all of the multiple layers of what is probably the multiple layers of the universe, esoterica to me is a way to reach beyond the obvious to the explanations of the more basic and the more in-depth, to get a better understanding of how things really work. So I will share that with you because if you really believe in the complexity and the beauty of the universe, and if you believe in parallel universes, and if you believe in what the essence of leaving the space-time continuum is about, it seems to me essential that when you're looking at that massive an operation, you really have to ask yourself, whoa, what's my role in this? And the answer comes back, oh, it's to figure out how to serve this greater reality, right? Because if you're trying to fly in the face of that reality, you're not only destined to feel a lot of pain, and you will, you're also destined to feel a lot of failure, and you will. Because the system is bigger than us individually. In fact, the system is bigger than us collectively in this room. In fact, the system is much bigger than all 7.3 billion of us on the planet. So at the stage we're at in human evolution, which I'll come back to in a little moment, it seems to me that the essential question is not what do I want, but how can I serve? In fact, as I like to tell my children, I have 4 of them, and then 4 grandchildren, it's not essential to even, in fact, it's probably misleading to ask what you want, because what it does is it tends to put a filter between you and the truth it's trying to manifest in front of you. And any filter is a block. It's not something that gives us an advantage. It gives us a limitation. So with that as a starting point, I just want to touch briefly, as some of you out there may know, one of the closest sisters in my life was Barbara Marx Hubbard, who transitioned a couple of weeks ago, and who has left an indelible mark, and one of those few people who can clearly feel good as she left, that her contribution to the intellectual ferment of the evolution of the human species is absolutely intact. Barbara was famous for a lot of things. I'm not going to go into many of them because it's not worth it. This is not a featurette for Barbara. But the one that really relates to today's conversation is a concept that she and I developed a little over a decade ago called Homo universalis. Barbara is famous for her contribution to human evolution is the idea of the fact that we absolutely have to evolve consciously now. What she meant by that was we don't have the privilege of time, the luxury of time, to let tens of thousands of years go by as we quietly evolve to a new level of the species. Now, for those of you who have any interest in this field, as you know, we've done this 32 times now. And if you look around the room, there's not one Homo erectus amongst you. There are no Homo Neanderthals outside of the White House. There's none of our prior species exists. And I want to share with you a very happy thought. It was believed by scientists for many years that each species exterminates the prior species because of its greater intelligence and evolution. And that is clearly not true. We now have hard evidence that there were many pockets of Neanderthals who continued to survive simultaneous with the movement down to the pinnacle point, who were never have ever encountered Homo sapiens, and those Neanderthals died. I remember asking my dear friend Willis Harmon, who was very much into esoterica, was my partner starting the academy. And for those of you who don't know Willis's biography, you should look it up. It's a fascinating one. He was the first professor in the world to teach artificial intelligence, and he taught it at Stanford University. He was for 16 years the chief futurist in residence at SRI, the most astounding, well, at that time, the number one think tank on the planet. Now, I'm sharing that with you because I asked Willis this interesting question about the Berlin Wall. I said, gee, Willis, what happened? Nobody I've ever met ever even conceived the Berlin Wall falling in our lifetimes. And yet we turned around in the blink of an eye, it was gone. What happened? And what he reported was that it ceased to be relevant, therefore it ceased to exist. In other words, what happened was, for a variety of practical and esoteric reasons, the people who were constrained by that wall no longer chose to give it meaning. And when it no longer had meaning, even though the early climbers of the wall were shot in the first days of the Berlin Wall coming down, the guards stopped shooting. People stopped getting it, and they just tore the wall down. It ceased to be relevant. That's what's happened to all of the prior species of human evolution. That's why there are 32 prior species. We're number 33. We're Homo sapiens sapiens. For those of you who don't know, we're not Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens is the man or woman who knows. And that's Coco the gorilla until she passed away in Palo Alto. She could sign. She had 13 characters in her vocabulary. She could tell you who her chimp was. She could tell you if she had a tummy ache. She could tell you in real time, in the moment. She was living in the now, for sure. But she didn't have what we were born with, which is Homo sapiens sapiens, technically. And what that means is the man or woman who knows, sapiens, that they know, sapiens sapiens. So reflective consciousness is the hallmark of Homo sapiens sapiens. And that's what we were born into. And that species is now dying out rapidly and will not survive. And this new civilization, and again, working off of Barbara's work many years ago, because she and I have been together for 35 years now. Barbara's work was about conscious evolution, but the necessity to consciously choose to evolve because time was not going to be enough, given the amazing destructive capability of our technology, both in terms of nuclear and in terms of planetary destruction, biosphere destruction, and human destruction. So for all those reasons, she said, okay, this new species has got to decide to evolve. It's got to choose to evolve in order for the species to survive. This will be the first time we've ever had to do that. Up until now, it just happened. In that context, she and I started debating what to call the people of this new species. So my guess is that everybody in the room I'm talking to is part of this new species. That species we named Homo universalis. And Homo universalis, like Homo sapiens, knows, like Homo sapiens sapiens knows that they know, so we all have reflective consciousness. But the distinguishing characteristic of Homo universalis over Homo sapiens sapiens is Homo sapiens sapiens knows that they know we are one. So it's unitary consciousness. It's the consciousness of the whole. So when you're sapiens sapiens, you don't realize we're all one. You think that there's them and us. You think a baby can die in Africa and it doesn't affect you. You think somehow that Exxon can continue to destroy the atmosphere and it somehow doesn't affect you. The idea of isolation and separation is endemic to the concept of sapiens sapiens. That's how we grew up. And that's not to make it wrong, by the way. That was what we used to get to where we are. But where we are today is Homo universalis. I can assure you, nothing's baked into the formula where we're going to automatically survive. In fact, my dear friend Deepak Chopra says that the odds are very much less than 50-50. And I asked him, well, gee, Deepak, wouldn't that be a tragedy? He goes, well, it would just be a failed experiment. In the cosmic scale of things, humanity would have failed after 1.25 million years of trying. So it's not certain that we are going to succeed. But I can tell you what is certain. The only species that will be alive, if we do survive, will be Homo universalis. Just as there are no prior Homo erectus, no more Cro-Magnon men, no more Neanderthals, there will be no more Homo sapiens sapiens, because the possibility of going backwards and not knowing that we have universal consciousness is no longer an option. Evidence is overwhelming. And the outcome of denying the truth of our universality is overwhelming. We are on a course of self-extinction, and we must choose, consciously evolve, to veer from that course. And if we do so, we will do so because we realize that we are one with the biosphere, we're one with each other, and we're one with consciousness. Well, that's pretty simple, really. But that's where we are at this point in time. And what happens, I cannot tell you for sure, but I can tell you some very practical things that we have done as a species, and some very practical things that we can do in the future. Example, I've noticed that a couple of your speakers are going to, or have talked about, the idea of manifesting greater material well-being. And I can assure you, if you look at my track record, I don't think I did all that. I think I got very good at learning how to manifest material reality. And I think anybody can learn it. And I think the Christ in the New Testament said it well, all these things and more I can do, so come follow me. In other words, get with the program. I noticed that one of the things that Sheldon wrote about in this little write-up of mine is the concept of magic plays with what you like to all hang out with in the seventh ray. And I do too. I've been teaching the concept of magic for many years, and I distinguish between sleight of hand and real magic. So sleight of hand is what David Copperfield does better than anybody alive, or certainly as good as anybody alive. We know there's a trick, we don't know how he does it. He manifests a spaceship in the middle of an auditorium in the blink of an eye. Don't know how he does it. But we know it's sleight of hand. We know it's not because he's the master of the universe and he's able to materialize from the aesthetic or etheric realms. No. Real magic is when you do. Real magic is when you can tap into what some would believe to be the academic appreciation of esoterica, and you can actually bridge it to the material plane of reality. So when people ask me, what do I do? What's my occupation? I tell them teacher. And they say to me, well, okay, how does that show up? What do you do to teach? I go, well, I bridge material to the etheric plane of reality. So if you think about it, Henry Ford said it best. It starts with an idea. So, if you look at an assembly line, he didn't build one and then think it up. He thought it up and then he built it. So he pulled from the etheric plane, the world of consciousness, the world of ideas. He pulled the concept of an assembly line and then he built one. And that's true time after time after time after time. If you look at all the great inventors and you look at all, whether it's Edison or you name it, they go into the esoteric for the concepts, for the consciousness, and they come out with something that they can then ground to the material plane of reality. When you do that well or skillfully, you make a lot of money, obviously. But it's more important than that, because what you do is you give yourself permission to change a lot of reality. And some of you, I think, know that I had the great good fortune of working very, very closely for the last 10 years of her life with Mother Teresa. And that was an amazing experience and the greatest honor of my life, obviously. And my job was to be in charge of finishing and then distributing, while she was alive, the movie of her life. The story of her life that she wanted told in her own voice, by the way. We used her as the voiceover. In the course of doing that, we got to spend a lot of time together over 10 years. And she got to know me and my family very, very well. And it was an extraordinarily personal and intimate long-term experience. And here's what I want to share with you on that. Mother Teresa was both an absolutely consummate human being. She was my favorite grandmother type person. And she was fully in that role, completely. And at the same time, she was the most powerful person I've ever met in terms of being able to use real magic, to bend what were the apparent laws of the universe at any moment in time. In fact, one of our funny jokes, those of us who were the closest to Mother used to say, is every once in a while someone would come up to us, either in Calcutta or some other place, and they spend a few days with Mother Teresa and they get all jazzed up, and they'd come in breathlessly saying, I think I saw a miracle. I think I just witnessed a miracle. And we'd all be very nice about it. We'd say, well, that's wonderful. What did you see? What happened? And we would kind of like talk them through it and help them feel good about it. And then they'd leave the room and we'd all just start tittering like a bunch of schoolgirls. Hee, 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 hee. You saw a miracle. Of course you saw a miracle. If you didn't see it when you weren't paying attention, that's all there ever was around Mother Teresa. Miracle after miracle after miracle. So where did those miracles come from? How does a bankrupt, not a penny to her name nun who was about 5'2", and with almost no body weights whatsoever, walk out of a convent one day, pick a leper up off the street, and within a few years has 3,600 nuns, has 350 priests, has 650 physical structures around the planet. That's real magic. That's real magic. Okay, that's not the kind of stuff of esoterica in the theoretical. That's about how do you ground the etheric plane, her level of consciousness, to the plane of reality. And once you've encountered a being of that magnitude, it's your whole life changes if you're at all alert, because you recognize that what you thought was possible and might even be probable turns out to actually be true. So there's a lot of interesting conversations, if we had time, and we don't today, we could talk about in terms of how does manifestation work? What does it mean to serve? How does one's life journey look if one comes at it from a radically different perspective than traditional? All of these things become interesting questions, but not for today. For today, I want to touch on two things. And I want to basically frame this in the context of, I have never heard of, and I listen a lot, I've never read about, I read a lot, I've never heard from someone speaking to me, and I talk to a lot of people. I've never heard, seen, or read about any problem on the face of the planet that cannot be solved today with existing resources and technology. Let me repeat that. I don't know of a single problem anyone's ever mentioned on the planet today that cannot be solved with today's resources and technology, if the will to do so were there. It's all about volition. I would include global population. I would include climate change. I would include the threat of nuclear winter, all of it, and then some. And if anybody would like to hear or know about how those solutions can come about, I'm more than happy to share that. But for today's exercise, what I wanted you to be aware of, we are in such negative times, potentially end times, that we decided the best way to help people get through this, because I perceived a lot of cynicism was setting in. A lot of people were beginning to get so upset and discouraged that they were losing their way, metaphorically, unable to see how we can get from here to there because of this monstrous mess in front of us. And there is a lot of legitimate inquiry that can go into that subject. There's no question that when I look at, if you've seen my work on climate change, if you've seen my work on renewable energy, if you've seen my work on any one of a dozen different subjects, you would see that I'm very, very concerned about the outcomes. I'll just give you one statement, which I'm certain is true. Human civilization as we know it will be clearly coming to an end by 2035, and everybody will know it, not 2100. That's a staggering statement. I'm either crazy, or if I'm right, everybody in this room better start rethinking what they're thinking about. And it is right. So, having been a leading climatologist for many years now, I can assure you that we are looking at the end of human civilization as we know it. And I can even explain to you how it's going to happen. The key issue is that's a choice. It does not have to happen. And we have the power within us and collectively to prevent that from happening, to steer ourselves a new course away from that level of destruction. But what we cannot do is ignore it. What we can't just put our head in the sand and pretend like it isn't real. Now, for some people, Deepak's one of them, the idea of changing life forms is not much more difficult than changing clothes. And when you believe as fervently as he does in the karmic wheel, who knows where it goes from here. But what I would like to leave with you today is, as an antidote to that cynicism, as an antidote to the depression that can settle over us when we look at this mess we've created, and boy, have we created a mess collectively. Because part of unitary consciousness is to know that we collectively created this mess, and we collectively have to resolve it. It's interesting how that responsibility now comes back to us. And by the way, I think we're up to it. I think we're up to that task. So what we started doing is 8 years ago, I did a podcast that I've been doing ever since, once a month, on the economy and society and business. And I urge you to go find it. It's quite good. It's called New Paradigms in Business. And then last January, just a few months ago, we launched a new show. And this one's not a podcast. It's actually on the high power station that serves the Central Coast of California, channel 1290 KZSB. So it's the most powerful AM station between, say, Ventura and Goleta. And we do this show between 5 and 6 every Friday because the 101 is so jammed, people cannot get home from work. It's crazy. And they're stuck. So we started doing a show aimed at those folks about solutions, and we call it Solutions News, which, by the way, you can get streamed to you. You can get it off our website a week later. I really urge you to listen to it, because the commitment behind the Solutions News show is that we're not going to bring up any question or problem that we cannot solve without today's technology and resources. In other words, we have a solution. We don't have a solution, we don't bring up the problem, the challenge. So it's called Solutions News. It's got an interesting format. We do an interesting interview with every show, and people love the show, and it's doing quite well. I would urge you to listen to Solutions News. I would urge you to, it's free. I would urge you to get a free subscription to Optimus Daily, which was referred to in my introduction as a daily little snippet. You can read it in 2 minutes or less. And it'll tell you 5 things positive, a solution happening somewhere in the world you didn't even know was happening. And you'll be delighted. It will inspire you to realize that the biggest problem we have today is that we believe what we read in the papers. So there's an old saying that William Randolph Hearst coined: if it bleeds, it leads. So if it's got gore and grit and ugliness attached, it's going to sell more papers. If it's uplifting and ennobling and enlightening, it doesn't tend to lead. It doesn't even tend to get covered. And so what we do with Solutions News and with our daily service, Optimus Daily, is we keep providing more and more of that solutions thinking. My goal is to get 100 million people subscribing for free to Optimus Daily, and I hope everybody in the room will help me do it. It's real easy to give a subscription away because it's free. And once you give it away, people start to realize that there's more optimism than there are more solutions than there are challenges. There's more optimism than there is cynicism, because optimism is the antidote to cynicism. And remember, if you light a single match in a dark room, you can see. So don't worry about putting on Klieg lights. All we need to do is one person at a time light that match. And where I wanted to end up with today's conversation is to talk about what that match looks like when you do it on a global basis on behalf of all of human civilization. I'm going to propose a very simple solution. It's the solution to end all strife on the planet. It's a solution to end all destruction of the biosphere on the planet. It's a solution that actually doesn't cost us, because it will make us huge amounts of wealth. We'll be wealthier 100 years from today than anyone can imagine sitting in that room if we were to introduce it. It would be the ultimate Marshall Plan, which, as you know, in 1947, created the greatest spurt of wealth in the history of human consciousness. And it was basically an attempt for us to do the right thing, to help those who had been our enemy, to recreate the world that we had bombed into oblivion, and to do so in the hopes that those two enemies would one day be our friends. And of course, they've turned out to be our two most reliable allies, Germany and Japan, since 1946. Well, the Marshall Plan was thought to be a completely crazy idea, passed by one vote, and as Harry Truman observed, it wouldn't have passed if they'd have called it the Truman Act. Because George C. Marshall was the head of the military in World War II. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They believed, this man who had just won this war, by one vote they believed, not by a lot, that his idea was worth trying. And his idea was to rebuild the vanquished, create a more prosperous society, in the belief that that society would then end war as we knew it. So I wanted to announce that, to me, heaven on earth, which is what I'm getting around to, is not an esoteric concept, it's an actually practical one. It's clearly much more economic. You can't do business in Syria today unless you're a bomb maker. And I can list country after country after country where that's true. So it's not even economically smart to be running the world the way we are. But here are the 7 things we could do, should do, and I believe are required of us to do. And if we did them, we absolutely would end human conflict. And we'd end the destruction of the biosphere. So what are those 7 simple things? And let me just make one more comment. I believe that every human being born on the face of this earth is entitled to these 7 things, every bit as much as Eleanor Roosevelt once envisioned. And if you're entitled by matter of your birth to these 7 things, then it's our responsibility collectively to deliver you these 7 things. What are they? Adequate nutrition. That sound like a stretch? That nobody should die in our presence who's a human being? That includes water and food, clean water and food. Is that such a big deal? Well, for about 1.6 billion people, it's an enormous deal. And for another billion or so, it's a questionable deal. Adequate shelter or housing. Adequate medical care. Does it sound like I'm asking for a lot here? Adequate clothing. Adequate non-gender biased education. Freedom from personal violence, i.e. domestic, and collective violence, war. Why aren't we free from war and from violence? And last but not least, we are all entitled to a freedom of expression. Some totalitarian countries, they concern themselves with that last one and say, well, political expression is not okay, but we'll let artists have expression. And I believe personal expression means all forms of expression, political as well as artistic. So those are the 7 things that if every human being who has a right to that was given those 7 things, which we're perfectly capable of providing, in what will be the new global Marshall Plan, what you would have is the end of violence. Oh, and by the way, you'd have the end of Homo sapiens sapiens. Because from that point on, no one would even doubt that we are one. We would have proven it. And what all of you can do out there is to support that idea physically and in all the ways that you believe esoterica can support that greater consciousness to evolve. Thank you for your time.
Rinaldo, thank you very much for those thoughts. Great to see you directly here there. So we have some time now for questions or comments, and please, as you do, rise and come up and take the microphone. So this will be good. I have one I want to ask a little later on, Rinaldo, we've heard you talk about before, but thank you for this. Yeah. Martha, yes. Tell Rinaldo.
Hi, Rinaldo. My name is Martha, and I'm one of the many people here who are working on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Can we play a minute? It's about translating. Closing the gap between what the soul says and what our bodies need. Let's take nutrition. That would be goal 2. And when I think about ending hunger, what occurs to me is that imagine that somehow we close the gap between the wastage and we could direct everything toward needs. We know the problem is distribution. It's not any inadequacy. But it's hard sometimes to find the middle term that activates us and creates the intelligent strategies that help us solve that problem. So I was wondering if you could help me find the middle term between ending hunger and the will to distribute all of the great resources we have right now, as you said, to provide enough food for everyone to eat. Thank you very much. I hope I was clear.
Yeah, no, I think you were. The question deals with basically ending hunger. And some of you out there know of Lynn Twist. Show of hands. Do some of you people out there know Lynn Twist? Okay, so Lynn's a really close friend of mine. She's also a fellow at the Academy, as Barbara Marx was, rather. And Lynn, as you know, was the chairwoman of the Hunger Project for quite some time. And wrote a great book, by the way, called The Soul of Money, and I urge you all to read it if you haven't. When she undertook that challenge, I believe she took it thinking one thing and ended up ending that challenge with another thing. So she took it looking at some of the most practical ways that one could change the distribution of food, the way that one could change the growing of food, et cetera. And by the time she got to the end of that project, many, many years later, what she realized was she was changing consciousness. So you see, where this whole starts, frankly, is in a room with people like this, or just with two people agreeing to shift their consciousness. So I don't know you and your friends, but I know very few of my friends, meaning the ones who I get the most intellectual support from, the most heart connection from, the ones who I feel the most aligned with, who are trying to do the work on the world at this time. None of my friends doubt that every human being has the right to be fed. In our consciousness, that's not something to talk about or to debate. That just is. I'll give you an example. If someone were to put a crying baby in the middle of that auditorium where you're sitting, and you were all instructed, do not help this baby. The baby has not had water for 3 days, and it's going to die in about a day and a half. And you're going to sit there and watch it die and listen to its screams, and you're not going to do anything to help, period. I don't think you'd follow that instruction. And yet, we have accepted that instruction on a global level. So it's got to start with our consciousness, folks. We cannot accept that that's okay. That baby that died in Africa just now is the same baby that I just put on the floor of your conference room, except you didn't see it. It wasn't in front of you, but he's there. She's there. She's dying in Yemen. She's dying. She's being raped in Darfur. It goes on and on and on. Congo. Okay, and it's happening in our country as well, in the U.S. Now, where do you go with that awareness? Well, once you start with the belief system that your consciousness can no longer hold the concept of food scarcity, it does not exist as a legitimate question. It's not something I would debate. It's not something I want to talk about to people, convince them of. Either you get it or you don't. You can tell me the world is flat, and I'm going to go, you know what? The flat earth theory is a religious belief. It is not scientific. It's not flat. The idea that we can't supply food in adequate quantities for every single human being on the planet is just like the flat earth theory. It's not true. It's just not true. So one point of the answer is distribution, which was just brought up by the question. Can we improve the distribution of food so that what we've already got, which is more than enough, can get to the people who need it? And the answer is yes, we can. But we can do more than that. We can recreate the way we grow food, which frankly we should, for a whole bunch of reasons, including if you think you got to grow food with glyphosates in order to have food to feed the hungry, the answer is you don't get the question. Because you never have to poison the earth in order to feed the hungry. The reverse is true. Organic farming produces a much better result than glyphosates, which thank God are finally being banned in Europe, and one day will be banned in the US. That we spray Roundup on stuff is just crazy. That toxicity so start with the conscious. Roundup in my life is not okay. Okay, nutrition, the lack of nutrition, not okay. That baby dying from water, lack of water, that's not okay. That baby dying from dysentery because the water they've got is so bad, it's filthy and should not be drunk by humans. That's not okay. That girls can't expect to go as far as their intelligence will take them in most of the world is not okay. That you are subjected to violence in your own home is not okay. And that you're subjected to collective violence in the form of war is not okay, period. Now, if you start from that, it gets real interesting. You go, okay, Now that I've switched my consciousness, how can I help other people switch theirs? Oh, and in the switching of my consciousness, do I honestly believe that as I believe, so shall it be? I do. Now, does that mean we get it right every single time? No. But most of the time, as I believe, so it shall be. It does happen. So what I'm really asking here, I'm preaching the gospel of collective responsibility. Because you're all nice people and I'm a nice person. And we have this collective responsibility. We got to fix this thing. And it starts with not accepting that it's okay. Just like the Berlin Wall was not okay. And that leper laying on the street without care was not okay. And when something's not okay, it's got to shift because consciousness changes.
All right. Helena.
Yes, I have a question, Rinaldo. It's not okay for gun violence in this country. It's not okay for citizens to have weapons of mass destruction. It's not okay. How do we solve this one?
Well, every once in a while, I like to celebrate the small victories, even though we're on the road to a much bigger problem. I got to tell you that the NRA is in complete chaos this week. It does delight me. Have you all been following what's been going on at the NRA?
Yeah.
Have you? It's fabulous.
Tell us.
Well, the president of the NRA was the felon Oliver North, who started fighting with the executive director of the NRA, Wayne LaPierre, who's been running it as his own private fiefdom for the last 25 years and built it to this monolith that it's become. They're suing each other for embezzling the organization. They're suing each other for malfeasance, misfeasance. The president's resigned. Wayne LaPierre has gone to the board and said he's not even welcome on the board anymore. I mean, they're fighting like crazy. Oh, and they're under investigation for probably funneling $30 million illegally into the Trump campaign. Now, if Trump remains president, or remains in the Oval Office, one way or the other, and I say that very sincerely because it's not entirely clear to me that if he weren't impeached and he were to be reelected, that he would actually leave. I believe he has been trying out in plain sight for the job of dictator for life. He's the buffoon who would be king. He believes in a monarchy. He believes he's the monarch, and he believes he ought to be able to give that kingdom to his children. And he believes he's above the law, and he believes he can do whatever he wants, and he can do it because he has the power to do it. And what we're finding out is just how weak right now the Democrats are. What we're finding out is their lack of willingness to stand up for principle is compromising their ability to get results. So I hope the impeachment process starts tomorrow morning. It can't happen soon enough, because if this man remains in office, and by the way, I don't even look at the question, will the Senate convict? That's not the question the Constitution poses for the House. What the House is supposed to do is indict under an impeachment article when conduct even partially as outrageous as what we've all witnessed happens. And the Congress has no choice, as Elizabeth Warren has said, but to impeach. We've gone past any conceivable excuse because the evidence is in plain sight. Now, having said that, if he's still in office in 4 or 6 years, I think we will have a monarchy. I think it'll be chaos. I think there'll be a lot of bloodshed in the streets as well. And I would hope that we would say, gee, how did we get here? Oh, one of the things we made a mistake about was all these weapons in society. One of the mistakes we made was we believe, let me give you an example. Why is it believed to be true that you're allowed to have an AK-47 in your possession, which is a military assault weapon, has no conceivable purpose for hunting or any legitimate purpose in society? Okay. Why isn't it okay to own a bazooka or a tank or an F-16 fighter jet? Because the courts have long held weapons of war are not part of the Second Amendment. And that's even if you misread the Second Amendment. And in my youth, I was a constitutional law scholar. And I can tell you for a fact, the Second Amendment doesn't say you have the right to keep guns in your home. It says for the purposes of a well-regulated militia. And if you've never seen a militia, you can go see one. It's a building in Williamsburg at the colonial city of Williamsburg. And it's a big red brick building where all the weapons were stored. And when there was an attack by the natives at that time, if they attacked, a bell would ring and you were supposed to drop your plow and run to the militia building, grab the weapon that was there for common use, go out and fight the hostiles, and as soon as it was over, bring the weapon back. That's what the Second Amendment meant. And that was exactly how it operated in the Founding Fathers' view. They never conceived of the fact that people would have AK-47s over their living room mantles. So, to answer the question, how? I start with, we have to be much more willing to say, this is insane. I read a statistic just 2 days ago. 288,000 children below the age of college have now been directly involved in a gun violence incident. I mean, in schools. Okay? That means we're training our children to be fearful. We're training our children that they are living in a war zone. And guess what? They are. So we're going to have to put an end to this. We have to say it's not acceptable. Remember that my sixth point is freedom from personal and collective violence. I'm not free from personal violence if I can't go to school as a 7-year-old and know that I'm going to come home alive. And if I got to do duck and cover drills constantly, which I do, how do I learn in that? And what do I learn in that space? So people have got to stop being so loose about this stuff. It's not okay. If you want to have a gun, great. Put it where Wyatt Earp would have told you to leave it, on the outskirts of town. There is no purpose for high-powered military assault weaponry in the United States of America on civilian streets, period, end of statement. By the way, the police agree with that, for the most part.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to come up against that firepower. So we've got to, so what we have to do is we have to first change our consciousness. I cannot tell you how many well-meaning, well-intentioned people are willing to debate guns. There is no debate. If you want to debate the flat earth, I'm going to tell you, you know what? It's a religious belief. God bless you. It's not my religion. And I'm going to walk away. I'm not going to try and convince you the earth is round. I'm not going to try and convince you that climate change is real. I'm not going to try and convince you that your belief in guns is insane. Some people may try to do that. God bless them. I'm not going to. It's insane, and I'm going to spend my whole life working to upset that insanity. But it starts with my saying it is insane. And making no qualm about the fact that what I'm asking people to do is to rise to a new level of human consciousness. If you are homo universalis, there is no conceivable way that shooting somebody fits, because you are one. Okay? And by the way, the suicide rates that are endemic now, epidemic, are in part fueled by the confusion of our times and the overabundance of availability of guns. Clearly. Now, you look around the world and you do collective statistics on almost any subject that you care about, including personal health. We don't do so good. We're 27th in the world. You look at education, we do real bad. We're down around 25th in the world. I mean, it's amazing the countries that are in front of us, okay? If you look at violence, we're by far number one. Gun violence particularly. So we have got to say to ourselves as a society, that's just crazy. And I'm going to urge you to take and look at this in a slightly different way than anybody else has. I believe we are in a civil war. And we've been in that civil war since the 1860s. And that's why there are Confederate statues all over the South. The Civil War didn't end. What we had was a cessation of hostilities appomattox. We did not end the basic conflict, because the basic conflict, as you recall, was a clash of two civilizations. The civilization of the North, which was the industrial civilization, which had endemic in it a vibrant middle class, a vibrant political system, came headstrong, banging heads with a provincial, parochial, plantation-driven, meaning 1 or 2% rich at the top, everybody else slaves or the equivalent. Okay, that's what was at stake, and slavery was the way that society stayed in business, which is why slavery became the issue over the Civil War. But the Civil War was about this clash of two cultures. The South wanted America to be like the South, and the North felt that was not a good idea for a whole bunch of reasons. So eventually they started a war. By the way, the South started that war, interestingly enough. And for people today, in the year 2019, to be saying that General Lee was a hero, the man was the leader of the rebellion. He was a traitor, every bit as much as Donald Trump was a traitor. Okay? So if you don't tell the truth and willing to take the consequences, you'll never stop the underlying problem. So the truth is, we're out of control with weapons of destruction in this country. That we need to have legitimate background checks. We need to eliminate weapons, assault weapons from our streets, period. We need to be able to see whether or not it really is essential for hunters to have rifles and handguns in urban populations, and whether they should be carrying them on their hips or hidden, even worse, underneath their clothes and walking into churches and libraries and schools. That is just bloomin' crazy. And if you think you want to live in a society like that, that's sort of like Westworld. You know, and we had a society like that. It was called the Wild West. And the only way that Wyatt Earp could clean it up was he passed one rule: leave your guns at the edge of town. Bring your gun into town, you better be faster in the draw than I am. And I don't particularly like that way of enforcing a law, but that law was a good law. And we ought to bring that law back, unless we want to all live in Tombstone, Arizona. And I don't want to live in Tombstone, Arizona. Nothing personal about that, but I don't want to be in Tombstone, Arizona.
We're kind of close.
In that era, okay? You don't want to live in that consciousness of Tombstone, Arizona, of the Wyatt Earp. Tombstone, Arizona today is just fine. I'm talking about the Wyatt Earp area. That's who wants to live in a war zone. And we now live in a war zone in America. Name me one city or community of any size that isn't subject to basically being in a war zone. And if you think I'm wrong, go ask the kids in Columbine or the high school a mile and a half away that just got hit last week. So we got to act on it. We have no choice. And we have to be willing to do so at the risk of personal friendships, at the risk of, like there's many people in my life I can't talk to about these issues. So I just don't talk to them. God bless them.
Thank you, Rinaldo. I mean, I tell you, we have time for maybe one more question. Okay, yes, good. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out.
If you're,
That was a great answer, thank you.
Let me say one more thing. I have listened to Rinaldo a lot over the last 30 years, and I can listen to him forever. I mean, this is an impassioned person who speaks the truth very clearly and is so full of stories. At the same time, one more question here, yes.
yes, a question I'm Jose Becerra, but I have a question from a viewer in London. Her question is, how do you change people's consciousness?
It's a colleague of ours in London, yeah.
Well, you want the good news or the bad news first?
Whichever. You're good on both, I'll tell you.
Okay. The bad news is, I don't think anybody ever changes someone else's consciousness.
Yeah.
Conversely, the good news is that everybody's capable of changing their own consciousness if they want to. And since the species that is in the process of dying out, it's self-exterminating, Homo sapiens sapiens, since that species is self-exterminating, I think if people really understood that that species was dying and would not survive this next transition, most people would elect to get on the other side of that. Most people would like to be Homo universalis. And frankly, if they don't, they'll end up killing each other off. And that's probably what's coming, folks. The bloodbath that's coming is probably going to be something that we're all going to have a hard time avoiding getting caught up in, for sure. But we can choose to get caught up in avoiding it. And by doing that, we can keep our own contacts with our own other sentient beings conscious and loving. I'll end with this story. First of all, although I don't believe you can change anybody else's consciousness, and Sheldon's heard this years ago, I've been saying this for like 30 years. We believe in the World Business Academy that nobody can change anybody else. All they can do is change themselves. However, it is a remarkable thing to see what happens around that person once they change themselves. It's absolutely remarkable. And what I like about people who are capable of embracing the possibility of esoterica, not the reality of it, just the possibility of it, is that there are choices that we didn't think we had. These choices are much bigger and broader than we thought we had. And so the consciousness shift that we can have is the consciousness we can choose to shift ourselves. And I guarantee, I absolutely put my life's reputation on it. as you change your consciousness, you will be shocked and delighted at what starts to change around you. Your whole world starts to change. And one of the nice things is you surrender what the world told you should care about. Like in my case, in business, the scorecard is how many dollars did you make? That's the scorecard. I think that's a stupid, crazy scorecard. I've never played that game. I don't tend to play that game. Don't have to play that game. And frankly, I'm shocked at how much money I've made not playing that game. But my point was to prove that even if I didn't play that game, I'd end up with whatever I needed to have. I wouldn't end up with an artificial victory measured in dollars and cents, which had no meaning to me or the planet, and probably would have been destructive in the process. Okay, so in shifting my consciousness, I'm taking a risk because I'm not playing by the normal rules of what society has set up, because that was the sapiens society. It was their rules. I'm shifting my consciousness. And that's because I'm Homo Universalis, and I know that's what I've got to do. I'm here. That's the time of day it is. That's where we are in the history of human civilization. So what I can do is give people examples. Sheldon says I can give them stories, and I'll end with a story. But if you give people examples and you help them with the stories, they can maybe develop the courage to take that next step, which is to cross over from being fearful of their daily bread, so to speak, and embrace how incredibly exotic and extreme and brilliant our consciousness is, and how it's infinitely capable of expansion. We can expand our consciousness like the universe. So here's the story. We had the great privilege a few years ago. The Dalai Lama agreed to come spend a day with the Business Academy in a private meeting. There was like 35 of us in the room. And we spent it all day at the Heinz Mansion in Newport Beach. As luck would have it, that was the day that the Nobel Committee announced he'd been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which he ultimately won. So it made for an interesting day. And because I was the organizer of the meeting, I got to sit next to him all day. And I can honestly say the guy grabbed my hand and didn't let go of my hand for hours and didn't stop giggling for longer. The man giggles constantly.
Giggles. He giggles.
He's constantly giggling. I mean, he's like, he thinks
Joyful.
everything is funny, and he's joyful. So here's the story. One of the executives that was invited to attend that conference got up and said, Your Holiness, it's one thing to preach compassion. It's one thing to preach forgiveness. It's one thing to preach the open-heartedness to men. But, what would you do? How would you feel if one of those Chinese soldiers, which right now are raping your people in Tibet, are killing them at gunpoint, some of them being bayoneting pregnant women. So now there's a red Chinese soldier. He's 2 feet from your face. He's got a bayonet to your belly, or he's about to pull the trigger. Now, what do you feel? Without taking much of a pause, the Dalai Lama said, "Oh, such compassion." And the interlocutor said, "Compassion?" He said, "Yes. Can you imagine what he would have to live with if he knew he killed the Dalai Lama?" Okay, you get the point?
Yeah.
You shift it. You just shift it. And if the Dalai Lama can do it, we can all do it too.
All right.